Marilyn arrived 30 minutes late, sunglasses on, scarf pulled tight around her hair, even though they were indoors. The room had already shifted into that uncomfortable silence that follows a star's lateness. Studio executives pretended not to be annoyed. Assistants avoided eye contact. Everyone waited for Marilyn Monroe to enter so the day could officially begin. Dean watched quietly. When Marilyn finally took her seat, she apologized too quickly, too brightly, like someone trying to smooth over panic with charm. Her voice was breathy, practiced, almost musical. The men in the room leaned forward without realizing it. The women stiffened. Dean didn't lean forward. He leaned back. He recognized the cadence immediately. It was the same voice people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're okay. They started reading. Marilyn stumbled over her first lines. She laughed, apologized again, asked to start over. The room tensed. A few glances were exchanged. Someone cleared their throat. Dean said nothing. He just waited. When she finally found the rhythm, something changed. Her voice dropped. The breathiness faded. Laura Sinclair emerged. Not the movie star, not the fantasy, but the woman underneath. For a few moments, the room forgot it was Marilyn Monroe reading. They were listening to someone confess something they'd never said out loud before. Dean looked at her then. Really looked. Not at the hair, not at the lips, not at the legend. At the pauses between words. At the way her hands clenched when the dialogue touched something too close to home. At the way she avoided eye contact when the scene required emotional honesty. When the reading ended, the room erupted into polite applause. Studio executives nodded approvingly. Someone said, "This is going to be special." Marilyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She excused herself and disappeared into the hallway almost immediately. Dean watched her go. During rehearsals, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Marilyn would arrive late, overprepared, She'd nail a scene and then immediately doubt it. She'd ask the director for reassurance, then mistrust it when she got it. Between takes, she'd retreat to her dressing room alone, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. People whispered, "She's difficult. She's unreliable. She's spiraling again." Dean didn't whisper. He'd seen this before, not in women, but in himself, in Jerry Lewis during the final years of their partnership, in Frank when the pressure got too heavy, in himself late at night when the applause faded and the room went quiet. This wasn't ego. This was fear. The kind that comes when the mask you've lived behind for too long starts to crack. The bedroom scene was scheduled for the second week of shooting. Everyone knew it would be a problem. It wasn't explicit. No nudity. No scandal. But it required something far more dangerous for Marilyn. Stillness. Emotional exposure. No jokes. No seduction. No escape. Just two people in a room, close enough to see each other clearly. Marilyn started drinking days before the shoot. Not openly. Not recklessly. Just enough to take the edge off. Enough to quiet the noise in her head. The crew noticed. The director noticed. The studio noticed. Nobody intervened. The morning of the scene, Marilyn arrived. Shaken daughter makeup artist whispered to an assistant. The assistant whispered to the producer. The producer whispered to the director. Harold Payton rubbed his temples and sighed. "Let's just get through it," he said. "We're already behind schedule." Dean heard that too. They rehearsed once. Marilyn couldn't stop laughing. The laughter came at the wrong moments, loud and brittle, like glass cracking. Payton called for a break. Marilyn retreated to her dressing room. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Dean sat on the edge of the bedset, still in costume, watching the door. When Marilyn returned, her eyes were glassy. Her smile was fixed. Too fixed. She climbed onto the bed, hit her mark, waited for the camera to roll. Action. Peyton called. Meryl delivered her first line perfectly. Then the second. Then the third. But something was wrong. Her voice had gone flat. The breathiness was gone, replaced by something hollow. She was performing, but she wasn't present. She was saying the words without letting them touch her. Dean was supposed to respond with a line of gentle reassurance, scripted comfort, romantic restraint. He didn't say it. Instead, he paused. The pause wasn't in the script. Marilyn looked at him, confused for half a second. The mask wavered. Dean didn't fill the silence. He stayed still, his expression soft, not seductive, not charming, just present. Marilyn's breath caught. The cameras kept rolling. Dean reached out slowly, not touching her yet, just enough to signal he was there. "You don't have to be perfect," he said quietly. That line was not in the script. The director opened his mouth to stop. "The take." Marilyn spoke first. "I don't know how to do this without pretending," she said. Her voice broke. Dean answered just as quietly. "Then don't pretend." The room disappeared. There was no set anymore. No crew. No lights. Just two people sitting on a bed, one of them finally being seen without the armor she'd worn her entire life. Marilyn started crying. Not graceful tears. Not cinematic tears. Real ones. The kind you can't stop once they start. She tried to turn away, embarrassed, instinctively reaching for the familiar smile. Dean gently took her hand. "You're safe," he said. "We're not going anywhere." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since rehearsals began, she wasn't performing. The camera captured everything. The slight tremor in her hand, the way her shoulders dropped when she finally stopped holding herself together, the way Dean didn't rush her, didn't rescue her, didn't turn the moment into a performance of his own. They sat like that for nearly a minute. No one said cut. When Peyton finally did, his voice cracked. That was incredible," he said softly. Marilyn didn't hear him. She was still holding Dean's hand. After the scene, Marilyn locked herself in her dressing room. People worried she'd spiral. Instead, she came out an hour later, calmer than anyone had seen her in months. "She didn't say much." She just thanked Dean. Quietly, privately. "That was the first time I didn't feel alone on a set," she told him. Dean nodded. "You never were. The studio wanted to reshoot the scene, clean it up, make it prettier." Dean refused. "If you touch it," he said, "you'll ruin the only honest thing either of us has ever done on camera." The scene stayed. When the film was released later that year, critics struggled to describe it. They talked about unexpected intimacy, unfiltered emotion, a performance unlike any Marilyn Monroe had ever given. What they didn't know was that it wasn't acting. It was that one moment someone stopped performing for her. Marilyn died less than 4 months later. Dean never spoke publicly about the scene. But years later, when someone asked him why that moment felt so different on screen. He said simply, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop acting and let someone else stop too. And that was Dean Martin. Not the drink in his hand, not the smile, not the legend. Just a man who knew when to stop performing and be human. She let herself be. Still, for the first time since she was a girl, Marilyn Monroe did not reach for the mask. She didn't flirt. She didn't smile on cue. She didn't perform. Safety for the people watching. She breathed. Dean could feel it immediately. Not excitement, not desire. Presence. The weight of someone actually standing in their body instead of hovering above it, waiting to escape. Thomas didn't rush her. He didn't fill the silence. He didn't reassure her with words. He stayed exactly where he was, close enough to matter, far enough to respect the choice she was making. Laura's eyes filled, not the glossy, camera-ready tears Marilyn had perfected, but the uneven kind that come when someone realizes they're about to be known. "Don't leave," Laura whispered. It wasn't in the script. Dean didn't answer right away. The crew tensed. Someone shifted behind the camera. Harold leaned forward but didn't speak. Thomas finally said, quietly, "I'm not going anywhere." The line landed like a hand on Marilyn's back. She exhaled, her shoulders dropped. And then something extraordinary happened. She didn't lean forward to be kissed. She stayed still and let him come to her. That single choice changed everything. Dean kissed her the way you kiss someone who is trusting you with something fragile. Not clinging, not taking. Just meeting her where she was. Marilyn's breath hitched. The tears came then, unstoppable, sliding down her cheeks as she stayed in the moment. Instead of running from it, she didn't break character. She didn't apologize. She let Laura feel it. The kiss deepened, not sexually, but emotionally, like two people discovering the sound of their own names after years of silence. When Thomas rested his forehead against Laura's, Marilyn closed her eyes and smiled, a small, private smile that wasn't for the camera at all. Harold forgot to breathe. No one moved. No one whispered. They were witnessing something they couldn't manufacture if they tried. After the scene ended, there was no immediate cut. Dean stayed where he was, still in character, still present, until he felt Marilyn's breathing steady. Only then did he pull back. That Harold finally whispered, "Cut." No one clapped. They didn't dare. Marilyn sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, eyes red, but she was smiling. Not the Marilyn smile. A quieter one, a relieved one. "I didn't disappear," she said softly. Dean nodded. "You stayed." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with romance. It was recognition, gratitude, the relief of being understood without explanation. They finished the rest of the coverage with ease. Close-ups, over the shoulders, details. Marilyn never once retreated into the mask again. The day dot. When filming wrapped, she sat alone in her dressing room for a long time. Dean knocked. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Tired, but different." He smiled. "That's usually how truth feels." Marilyn hesitated. "You didn't save me today?" Dean shook his head. "No, you did that yourself." "I just didn't get in the way. The film wrapped weeks later. Critics would later describe Marilyn's performance as restrained, raw, and haunting. They would say it was her most honest work. Some would say it was the first time they saw the woman behind the image. Marilyn never publicly spoke about how she found that performance. But one assistant recalled something she said quietly. One night, near the end of shooting, "I didn't know I was allowed to stop pretending." Dean never told the story. He didn't frame it as kindness or heroism. To him, it was simple. He saw someone drowning and chose not to demand they swim for his benefit. When Marilyn died later that year, Dean was silent. He didn't attend press events. He didn't give quotes. He didn't offer commentary on what she meant to Hollywood. Years later, when asked why their scene still felt so different from anything else on screen, Dean answered in the same plain way he answered most things, because nobody was acting, and that was the truth. For a few minutes on a quiet soundstage in 1962, two people stopped performing for the world. One of them didn't make it out alive, but for that moment she was seen, and that mattered. Not desired, not admired, not consumed. Seen. That was the difference, and Marilyn felt it the instant she stopped pulling away. De que soit dramatic or sweeping. It didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, cautiously, like a truth testing whether it was safe to exist. The camera caught everything it wasn't supposed to catch: the hesitation, the surrender, the fear dissolving into trust. It lasted barely 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds changed the temperature of the room, changed the scene, changed them. When Harold finally called cut, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence wasn't professional. It was reverent. The cinematographer stared at the monitor with wet eyes. The script supervisor had forgotten to write. They all knew what they'd just witnessed, the rare moment when performance collapses and something real takes its place. Marilyn walked off the set quickly, wiping her face, retreating, not in shame, but in overwhelm. Dean watched her go and understood something most people never did. When you've spent your entire life hiding, being truly seen feels like both death and rebirth at the same time. From that day on, everything changed. Marilyn stopped arriving late. She stopped vanishing between takes. She stayed present, grounded, focused. She had found a way to work that didn't feel like self-destruction. Laura could be brave. Laura could be vulnerable. Marilyn could stay alive. A quiet friendship grew between them, not romantic, not performative. Something deeper and rarer. Recognition. Two people who understood what it cost to keep the mask on. Two people who knew what it meant to disappear inside a persona so completely that you forgot who you were underneath it. Between takes, they talked, not about Hollywood gossip, but about fear, loneliness, survival. Dean talked about Steubenville, about being the son of immigrants, about always feeling slightly out of place. Marilyn talked about foster homes, abandonment, men who took without seeing, an industry that adored her image and ignored her pain. They weren't fixing each other. They weren't saving each other. They were simply telling the truth in a space where truth was usually punished. Filming wrapped in late May 1962. The footage was extraordinary. The intimacy felt earned, not staged. The bedroom scene became the emotional center of the film, not because it was provocative, but because it was honest. On the final day, Marilyn hugged Dean and held on longer than expected. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." Dean didn't pretend not to understand. "You're braver than you think," he told her. She smiled, sad and knowing. "Or maybe I just stopped pretending for once." 3 months later, Marilyn Monroe was gone. Dean heard the news in Las Vegas before a show. He canceled. He flew home. He shut the world out for 2 days. When Frank finally reached him, Dean said only one thing: "She was the bravest person I ever worked with." Frank didn't understand. "Bravest? How?" Dean answered quietly. "She let herself be seen." Do you know how hard that is? The film was released that December. Audiences felt it immediately. Critics called it Marilyn's most honest performance. Dean was nominated. Marilyn was honored posthumously. People talked endlessly about the chemistry, the intimacy, the magic of that scene. What they couldn't see was what made it possible: a private conversation, a moment of safety, 7 words that changed everything. Let the character carry it for you. Years later, Dean Martin rarely spoke about Marilyn. The grief sat too close to the bone. But once, in a late interview, when asked about the most meaningful work of his life, he paused and said, "Working with Marilyn taught me something." When pressed, he added, "The bravest thing you can do isn't hiding your fear. It's showing it to someone you trust and believing they won't destroy you for it." That's what happened on that set in 1962. 2 people stopped performing for the world. One of them didn't survive much longer. But for a brief moment, she was not an icon, not a fantasy, not a symbol. She was a woman allowed to exist without armor. And sometimes, even briefly, that kind of being seen is enough.